وهو قادر يجيب. وهو مرة دكتور رجب أظنه في إحدى الدروس، هو كان تلميذا لديه أيضا، فقال له هذا الكتاب جيد جدا، وتكلم وأشار إلى الكتاب وترك الفصل. وجد this man is coming after 2-3 months، بعد 3 أشهر أو 4 أشهر بالكتاب مترجما. وهكذا أهل اليابان، طبيعة أهل اليابان ما شاء الله. ونحن نسمع منه الآن عن السيرة والإسلام في اليابان إن شاء الله. لك 15 دقيقة، ممكن نزيد لك دقيقتين.
أول أشكر لدعوتك إلى هذا المؤتمر دكتور عائشة ودكتور دين. Today, oh, it's a mic, please. This is also mic.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, no problem. And today I will talk how the Sira literature has been created in Japan to show how Japanese people has encountered and embraced Islam, especially on our way to modernization. Now, I think knowing the history of the Sira literature in one country can show what kind of laws are expected from the Prophet and Islam in their own society. In Japan, we have a very short history of Islam. As such, it has been approximately 130 years, so almost 1 century since the first Sira work was written. Moreover, regarding Islam and other East Asian countries, Japan has a much shorter history with Islam when compared to China, but a longer history than Korea. In China, they have been communicating with Muslims since the 17th century, so the very beginning of Islam itself. In fact, up until the 18th century, they were creating their own Islamic culture and civilization by using Confucian terminology. On the other hand, presently in Korea, maybe as some of you know, the evangelical Christianity is so strong that 1/3 of the Korean population are Christians. However, Islam is not very popular in Korea, and accordingly, there are very few Muslim scholars in Korea, and actually today some Korean Christians are worried of the rise of Islam in their country. So in the following section, I'm going to review Islamic history in Japan based on the publication which describes the life of Prophet Muhammad. Then first, there's some classical Sira translation by Muslim and non-Muslim Japanese scholars. We already have the translation of the Sira classics written by Ibn Ishaq. And in addition, there is the most recent one by Mustafa Shibai, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria. In particular, both works, as typical representative of classical Sira works, mostly describe the military history and war records of the Prophet Muhammad. So today in the following, I will show the original history of Sira written in Japan, besides this translation of classical Sira works. Then the history of the Sira originally created in Japan can be divided into the following 4 stages. And the first stage is the age of the mere importation of negative Muhammadan images from Western Christianity. The Sira work in this photo is a translational one in 1979 by the Japanese foreign minister at the time. He's translating and adapting the work of the British Christian Orientalist Humphrey Prideaux by using old Chinese terminologies, like this photo. And it's in the early days of the Japanese Sira history, there was an importation of the typical negative images of the Prophet Muhammad from Western Christian scholars. For example, the wrong and negative criticism to his polygamy without the consideration of historical context. And the reason why these Western Christian scholars had an influence on Japanese understanding of Islam is because in Japan, at first, modernization means the importing and following the worldview of Western great powers. So compared to Islam, Christianity has a long history in Japan, and as I have shown in above, Islam in Japan has only 1 century of history, whereas the missionary activity of Christianity in Japan started already in the 60th century. Then it reached some influential politicians who had finally converted to Christianity. Then after that time, till the modernization of Japan, the framework to understand the different civilization is mostly given from Western intellectual. Even today, their influence is huge over the understanding of Islam by Japanese. Then, today the Japanese Muslim population stands at 100,000 people, which is approximately 0.1% of the total population. In contrast, Japanese Christians represent about 1% of the country. So these figures also show us how Christianity gained great popularity in Japan during the first 5 centuries compared to Islam. And the second period is the first part of the 20th century. And in this era, the Prophet Muhammad was described as a symbol of political leadership and given special attention in the historical context of Islamic Pan-Asianism in Japan. Concerning this second stage of Japanese theater history, it is the time when Japanese people overcame the stereotype of Islam problem. There was political competition with Western powers at that time, and Japan was trying to be an established political leader, especially in the East Asia. And actually this was expected of Japan by other Asian countries also, including Muslim majority countries. Specifically after Japan had fought with Russian Empire and finally won, some Muslim activists came and tried to make the Japanese emperor as a Muslim political symbol and leader in Asian countries. And again, at that time around world where Japanese people were seeking the ideal archetype and political model outside of Western civilization. For that aim, the work of Thomas Carlyle in this photo, the famous historian from Great Britain, was widely read in Japan during that time. And his work shows the great historical role of the Prophet Muhammad, not only in the Muslim world, but also in the world history. Then, in this era, influenced by this work, Japanese scholar in this photo, Dr. Shuma Okawa, the famous Pan-Asianist, had a great interest in Islam and focusing on the fact that the Prophet Muhammad is the leader of both politics and religion. As we can see in the classical syllabus, the Prophet Muhammad tried to create, manage, and expand his religious community by real politics. And traditional Islamic studies have been discussing how to realize and manage the ideal Muslim communities in the study of Siyasa. So this point is very different from Christianity and looks unique to him because, for example, Jesus did not teach how to manage Roman Empire or Christian Empire in the Bible. So this fact gave him and Japanese scholars a new perspective of religion. Because in the traditional understanding of Western religious studies, the sphere of politics is rigidly distinguished from the sphere of religion. Therefore, the correlation between religion and politics in Islam looked so vivid and attracted Japanese scholars at that time, at 20th century, with a historical background that Japanese people themselves were trying to establish a theocracy with the divine emperor. This Dr. Oka is also one of the first translators of Quran in Islam and wrote his original syllabus of the Prophet Muhammad to clarify this political aspect of Islam. Then after World War II, the political aspect of Islam was pushed into the background because of the failure of making Imperial Japan as a religious and political representative in Asian countries. And Japanese people came to avoid talking about the unity of religion and politics anymore. However, especially after the Cold War and the completion of American dominance over the world, the younger generation has started to seek an alternative worldview on its framing international relations in different civilizations and religions. And in this trend, and because of recent conflicts between the US and some Muslim groups, Islam has gained the interest of the Japanese people again. Along with the younger population's interest in this real politics, there's also the cultural aspect whereby the Prophet Muhammad has gained their interest. For example, Dr. Sasaki, one of the youngest scholars in the field of comparative religious studies, he includes the Prophet Muhammad in his work along with Martin Luther, the father of Protestant Christianity, as a representative revolutionary of world religion. He focused on and depicts the originality of the Prophet Muhammad in this book as the spirit of respect to females and consideration for the role of women in a religion, in Islam. For example, in Christianity, only the mother of Jesus, Maryam, is given special respect and interest, but there are not many stories about the wife of Jesus. However, in our Islamic studies, not only later female scholars, but even already Aisha, the young wife of the Prophet Muhammad, is an indispensable hadith transmitter and great jurist in the history of Islamic jurisprudence. Therefore, the role of women is very important in Islamic history and Islamic studies. And Dr. Sasaki, he's not Muslim, but pointed out we cannot understand the birth of Islam as a religion without its first follower, Khadija, the first wife of the Prophet Muhammad. In fact, at first, even the Prophet Muhammad himself could not understand what happened to him when he got the first religious inspiration, Tanzil. But Khadija accepted it without any doubt and tried to give an explanation by introducing him to her Christian-related work on Nafa. So finally, based on this original history of Islam, this Dr. Sasaki pointed out that the life and activity of Prophet Muhammad is an epoch making to change the male-dominated society at the time. Then not only Dr. Sasaki, but other Japanese female Muslim intellectual has also translated the biography of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad and this right side book, and pointed out the role of female in the history of Islam. And in the preface of this book, the author says the aim of this book is to make Japanese Muslims recognize the important role of Muslim females, not only for household instincts, but also as religious intellectual to lead and keep every Muslim community. And I will move to the fourth stage. And as for the latest stage of Islamic Seerah literature in Japan, some authors revived the tradition with new media like novels and comics that are easy to read for the younger generation. We call this genre of literature by Japanese English the light novel, not heavy novel. It means not too much heavy to read like classical novels. For example, Dr. Hasan-Ko Nakata, who is a representative Japanese grammar, he has completed his doctorate at Cairo University, wrote this light novel by using the motif of Prophet's life. This work does not directly depict the history of the Prophet Muhammad, but is rather a reflection of the personality of the Prophet and those of his wives and companions on the modern society. So it means he tried to show if they were living in these modern times, how they were acting, especially in Japan, he's showing in this novel. Then in general, today younger generation do not have much interest in historical literature. Therefore, he tried to make a breakthrough of their secondary creation based on traditional Seerah literature. And in this work, he does not depict only the history of the Prophet, but also includes the history of Islam in Japan by using some fictional characters' abilities. This is one of the most interesting and original efforts in my country in the field of Syria literature. By the way, the name of the main character is Aisha, and her name was transcribed as this Chinese character Aisha. And as Japanese can understand their own language, the meaning, because in Japanese character and Chinese character means the character has the every meaning. So this word, transcribed Aisha, means in Chinese and Japanese the elegance of the love. So they are putting the other different meaning on this character name. In addition to these novels, which involve motifs from the motifs of the prophetic Sira, he has published Q&A books for junior high school students, and he answers the question and anxiety about the life of younger generation based on the teaching and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. As Dr. Nazra has mentioned yesterday, and also Mr. Sham at last session, how to make it easier and accessible for younger generation to reach the Shira works is our urgent task today. So I think this is one of the examples of our efforts of how to make it easier for younger generation to reach Shira works and Shira contents. And here, I will wrap up my talk here. As we have seen today in the short history of Islam in Japan, we have reviewed first how the Japanese people had received the negative image of Prophet Muhammad as the first stage of modernization from the books written by Christian writers. But after that, especially when they prepared for World War and tried to establish Pan-Asian relationship against the Western world, the Japanese found in the Prophet Muhammad the face of an ideal political leader who ruled different nationalities. And as for the present, the political aspect of Islam has been not given enough attention, while Japanese people who are interested in the Prophet Muhammad focus on how he has managed his family and inner society, as well as the diplomacy with outside of his community. So especially his respect to females and how females has been given the great contribution to the development of our Ummah and Islamic studies has gained Japanese interest. And this short history shows the transition of interests of Japanese people on Prophet Muhammad, and at the same time demonstrates we can extract uncountable faces and characters of Prophet Muhammad in the needs and demands of the time as the ideal archetype of humanity. And this is not only the case of Japan, as Prof. Nazira has shown it yesterday. We can see the shift in the focus of the character of Prophet Muhammad over time in other cultures like Urdu literature also. Not only the contents of Sira, but also the media and the way to transmit the life of Prophet Muhammad also has been changed as I show it in these characters. And in the most recent phase of the Sira literature in Japan, we use this kind of pop culture to make it easy for non-Muslim younger generation also to know the history and the spirit of the Prophet Muhammad and his families and his companions. And I believe this new strategy is suitable not only for Japanese but also for other nationalities, because as in those media are gaining popularity among Muslim countries also. And for example, this is a recent Shira anime produced by both Saudi and Japan. And the title of this anime is different, The Journey. And this anime depicts the story of Sura field when the Prophet Muhammad was born and the troops of Ethiopia were defeated. And this is one of the examples how Japanese culture try to contribute to Sira works today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fuga, lecturer in Tokyo University, for all this very useful information about the trajectory of Islam in Japan, the Sira studies. And now my brothers and sisters, as we yesterday combined the inaugural session with the first session, we are combining also concluding ceremony with the session with this last session. So we have little time now. Before that, we have maybe 5 minutes for some questions if you have. Be brief, please. 5 minutes, and then we will ask Professor Aisha to come to chair the concluding session, inshallah. Now, there is anyone who wants to ask or comment, who need more information about Japan, Hamidullah, or
Dr. Fuga, many thanks. One clarification requested. You said Warqa ibn Nawfa, the relative of Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, was a Christian. But as per my knowledge, he was a Jew. So if you can clarify, please. Thank you.
You mean Warqa ibn Nawfa?
Yeah, Warqa ibn Nawfa, you said he was a Christian. But as per my knowledge, he was a Jew.
Yeah, actually some people say he's Christian or some people say he's Jewish. So because of that, sorry, thank you for the question. Some people say he was a Christian, and some people say he was a Jewish. I read some Muslim scholars say he's just Hanif, so not categorized as either as a Christian or Jewish. So I don't know. Allah.
thank you.
Yes, please. Sister, anyway, is there any remarkable attribution or distinguished point for Hamidullah? Distinguished him from others?
Thank you very much for your question. I believe the, what would I say, selection of Hamidullah as a modern, servant of the Seerah was because of his bridging traditional Islamic and Western methodology and achieving that kind of rank at a very early period in the West. I mean, earlier, mid-20th century. So he's kind of laying the groundwork for a revival of Islamic methodologies based on the Seerah, in which others will follow him. So granted, he is a scholar. He is not an ideologue, right? So usually we hear about Maududi or somebody who's leading a political movement. Well, many of us are in the university and are scholars, and our contributions may never become popularized, to that extent that we start a social movement, but we are working very quietly to bring the sources, to bring the manuscripts. And you reminded me, one thing I want to say very quickly, I forgot to mention one of his books is on the battles of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And that touches on 2 points that came up in our deliberation, that Hamidullah was not an apologist. He was not trying to say, we won't talk about that, right? He talked about the various battles as exemplary and as related to international relations and relations of Muslims with others. But what even the Western Orientalists in the review of his book said, and Hamidullah went to Arabia himself and he walked where those battles took place and he measured and he had this very serious search for truth. Wallahu alam.
Was there any relationship between him and Abdullah Yusuf Ali in the Quran and Muhammad Marmadak Piktal? Is there any connection between him and them? Because they were in Hyderabad.
Well, Hyderabad was a great center of culture. It was, there was a wealthy nizam, he was called ruler, a patron, and Osmania University, there's a whole series of the level of Arabic was very, very high. So editing manuscripts, publishing texts. Now we could say Pickthall was maybe sustained, patronized by the Nizam, but he was not himself, that kind of scholar of manuscripts. So he took the aid of various Muslim scholars, and mashallah, he did a great job. So it's a different kind of thing, right? And again, it's of interest to us, I think, because many of us are in the university and in academia, so sort of bridging those worlds of the academic in the library, working on a manuscript, and then being able to produce works that also introduce Islam at a broader level. And remember, he's doing that in the 1950s and 60s. Wallahu.
I think we stop here.
Yeah.
And on behalf of all of you, I thank all our speakers. Alhamdulillah. Did you have so much? Okay.
Jazakumullah khair. Jazakumullah khair. Quick question to Professor Marcia. You touched on the interesting fact that in the 1920s, 30s, Professor Hamidullah was looking at Sirah and the life of Prophet Muhammad from the point of view of implementation and change and transformation. And some of the aspects I was trying to raise in some of my previous comments. So I just wonder if you could maybe comment on that and some of the points that I kind of raised earlier, your view on that.
Well, again, I think it was very relevant to your points raised before. And remember, Hamidullah is also kind of criticizing some of his fellow Muslims and saying, we have this heritage and we are not doing the heavy lifting to study our own heritage and understand how it can contribute to all of humanity. Right, and I think there's also a certain tension, right? One criticizes, the Orientalists, or they're distorting the tradition. So Hamidullah's project was to search for truth. And if he found that the Orientalists said, Muslims took their law from the Romans, or Muslims took their law from the Jews, then he would go and investigate, right? And present not only the original contribution to humanity of Muslim scholars in these fields, drawing on the Seerah. Let's not lose sight of the Seerah, right? That is the core, the heart, but then all these other disciplines. But again, this is for us, but it's also for all of humanity. So there was, shall we say, an intellectual foundation, and then take the case of Islamic economics or Islamic international relations, then somebody has to go and write the constitution. Somebody has to create the institutions. So he was not an institution builder, but he was bringing the groundwork so that others can build on it. And he was very early. He was a pioneer.
بس لم أسأل، ولكن هناك إضافة رتوش قليلة لمن يسأل عن مكانة أو تميز محمد حميد الله. فكنت أعرف من قبل أنه أنجز أحسن ترجمة لمعاني القرآن بالفرنسية، لأنه ترجمه لا كلغوي أو عالم فقط، إنما كمؤمن. وترجمة القرآن أو غيره من النصوص الدينية بصفة عامة والقرآن، وهذا عن تجربة في ترجمة المصطلحات الصوفية وكذا وكذا، فيحتاج إلى إيمان حقيقي ليدرك المعاني العميقة للغة العربية بالخصوص. يعني هذا العلم محمد حميد لم يعطى حقه، وكان مغمورا رغم الجهود العظيمة التي بذلها. ثم إنه أنجز أحسن عمل أو أضخم عمل توثيقي للسيرة النبوية في الوثائق التي جمعها وبذل مجهودا فيها ليجمع المراسلات النبوية وغير ذلك، يعني عمل ضخم جدا. ثم كتابه في السيرة النبوية أيضا عمل عظيم نظرا لمنطلقه ولعمله، يعني كان يعمل بيقين، ثم كان يتقن حوالي 20 لغة عالمية، يعني أكثر أو أقل على كل حال. يعني كان
هو مات وقد كان يتعلم اللغة التايلاندية وهو بالتسعينات.
نعم، هذا وعندما طلب مني إعداد هذا الموضوع طلعت على تحقيقه لسيرة ابن إسحاق التي أشارت إليها الأستاذة، وهو عثوره على القطعة في المغرب في جامعة قرويين، وحققها، ومن يقرأ مقدمته فقط يدرك أن الرجل كان عالما يجمع بين القديم والحديث، وكان يعني يتعامل حتى مع المستشرقين معاملته مع التراث وعلمائه، يعني كل علماء الفقهاء وغير ذلك. كان في الحقيقة رجلا علما من أعلام الإسلام.
شكر الله لكم، شكرا، وشكر الله لجميع محدثينا، ونتشرف بدعوة الدكتورة عائشة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدي مولاي محمد بن عبد الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. ماذا أقول لكم بعد يعني هذين اليومين مليئين بالأطروحات المتميزة، ولكن سيرة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم نبع لا ينضب، فمهما قلنا ومهما تحدثنا أيضا يعني لا نعطيه قدره كما يجب. لذلك يعني طبعا نحن لا استطيع الا ان اقول شكرا لكم اخوتي، وشكرا لضيوفنا الكرام الذين يعني تجشموا عناء السفر واتوا لنتحدث قليلا يعني في سيرة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. وكما قلت ايضا في بداية هذا اليوم، نحن إن شاء الله بإذن الله سوف نتابع وسوف يعني نعمل على أن نقوم كل عام بتخصيص بعض الأيام لنتحدث مؤتمر، ندوات، مواد مستديرة، أي شيء نتحدث فيه عن يعني جانب من كل جانب من جوانب سيرة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم العطرة التي لا نشبع من سماعها ونعيشها. نحن نعيشها، نتنفسها ليل نهار. فلذلك يعني أنا فعلا حقيقة سعيدة جدا طبعا بهذين اليومين، ومروا سريعا. فنسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يجعلنا من المجالسين لسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم والصالحين وأولياء الله سبحانه وتعالى، ويعني الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم كما يقول أقربكم بما معنى أقربكم مني مجلسا يوم القيامة أحاسنكم أخلاقا. فإن شاء الله نتمنى أن تكون أخلاقنا يعني حسنة لكي نجالس الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم، ويجعلنا من الذين يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. وطبعا أنا أشكر الأستاذ الدكتور إبراهيم زين، الأساتذة الذين شاركوا في يعني في هذا المؤتمر، والدكتورة آسيا دونيز، والدكتور بلال أحمد، والدكتور خالد بن محمد بن غانم، الثاني ابننا يعني جزاه الله خير، والأستاذة خديجة كبرى، والأستاذ الدكتور رجب شنتورك، والأستاذ الدكتور زكريا رايت، الدكتور عبد الحميد مجيد الشيش، والدكتور عبد السلام مسيوني، والدكتور توجك مورا، والأستاذ الدكتورة مارسيا هيرمانسون، والأستاذ الدكتور مبروك زيد الخير، الأستاذ الدكتور محمد خازر صالح المجالي، الأستاذ الدكتور محمد المصطفى عزام، والأستاذ الدكتورة نجية عارف، والدكتورة نظيرة أحمد، والأستاذ هشام نورين، والدكتور يعني أعضاء مركز محمد بن حمد الثاني لسماحة المسلمين في الحضارة. أشكرهم يعني ولا أستطيع أن يعني أن أقول شيئا يعبر عما في نفسي تجاههم بأعمالهم وجهدهم، ويعني ماذا أقول؟ لا أستطيع والله حقيقة. أحيانا مش أحيانا، في كثير من الأحيان الكلمات أو الكلام أو الألفاظ لا تستطيع أن تحمل مشاعر الإنسان، فتوفي يعني بهذه المشاعر. لذلك أقول شكرا جزيلا وجزاكم الله خيرا الأستاذ الدكتور دين محمد والدكتور محمد ما شاء الله عليه وتبارك الرحمن، والأخت الكريمة العزيزة بن النعيمي، فجزاهم الله خير الجزاء وجزاكم جميعا. ويعني والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالصدق وتواصوا بالصبر.
في الحقيقة أتشرف بدعوة الأستاذة خديجة الكبرى والتي آسيا الأستاذة آسيا هي التي
هي التي
آسيا، ومعها الأستاذ الدكتور رجب شنتوق. ففي الحقيقة عملوا بتلك هذه الحية الشريفة فيمكنها تعالوا وأين جزاكم الله.
هذه الحلية الشريفة حلية من الحلية، يعني حلية للبيت، يعني لأن الصورة ممنوع عندنا. هذا تصوير النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، حديث مروي عن سيدنا علي، يعني يصور النبي أوصافه الجسمية والأخلاقية. والدكتورة آسيا هي التي فعلت هذا التصميم والتصوير، فهي من يعني أحسن الفنانات في هذا المجال. هي عملت أكثر من 45 واحد من كذا، وهذا يأخذ على الأقل 6 أشهر أو سنة بالذهب، وهذا غالي جدا. إن شاء الله في المستقبل نعمل
غالي. لا هو غالي، ولكن الأغلى منه
المحتوى. أيوة، الصرف والمصروف كلاهما. إن شاء الله في المستقبل نرتب هنا عرض اكزيبيشن، فأيضا ورشة عمل لتعليم التسييف إن شاء الله تعالى. هذه هديتها إلينا إن شاء الله تعالى.
شكرا جزيلا.
هي
طيب شكرا.